The explosion threw Commander Eva Rostova against the reinforced bulkhead as Loki's massive silver form crashed through the airlock doors. His jaws clamped around the severed power coupling that was spewing radioactive coolant across the corridor. Sparks cascaded from the walls like deadly rain, while alarms shrieked their mechanical death song. But Eva could only stare in horror as her loyal Siberian husky's fur began to glow with phosphorescent veins of green fire. "Loki, drop it!" she screamed, scrambling to her feet as the rad storm outside hammered Canis Base with another wave of alien lightning. The coupling in his mouth was cooking him from the inside out, but the stubborn dog refused to let go, his blue eyes fixed on hers with desperate intelligence. Behind him, the reactor core's emergency klaxons joined a symphony of imminent death. 14 minutes until cascade failure. 14 minutes until humanity's first permanent Martian colony became a radioactive tomb buried in the rust-colored soil of an unforgiving world. The corridor bucked like a living thing as another solar flare, amplified by the alien minerals embedded deep in Mars' core, struck the base's outer hull. Through the reinforced viewport, Eva caught a glimpse of the impossible storm raging outside, green lightning splitting the crimson sky in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The rad storm wasn't just weather. It was something alive, something that had been sleeping in the Martian soil for millions of years and was finally waking up. "Commander, we've got multiple hull breaches on levels 7 through 9. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the failing comm system. "The Z-Canes are showing severe biological anomalies. Anubis just grew a third arm, and Nyx, Christ, Eva, her skeleton is restructuring itself in real time." Eva forced herself to move, her boots splashing through the radioactive coolant as she approached Loki. His transformation was accelerating. The familiar silver coat she'd buried her face in during countless lonely Martian nights now shot through with veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with the base's failing power grid. When he finally dropped the coupling, his mouth opened to reveal teeth that gleamed like polished metal. "The ship is bleeding, Eva," he said in a voice like gravel mixed with starlight. "We have to stop the bleeding." The words hit her like a physical blow. Loki had never spoken before. None of the zero-G canines had. But now his blue eyes held an intelligence that was rapidly expanding beyond anything terrestrial. The genetic modifications that had made the Z-Canes capable of surviving in Mars' hostile environment were activating, triggered by something they brought back from the deep lava tubes. Something that should have stayed buried. "Arya, status report," Eva commanded, her training taking over even as her worldview cracked like thin ice. "Cascade failure in 13 minutes, 27 seconds. The AI responded, though its voice now carried harmonics that made Eva's teeth ache. "Automated repair systems offline. Radiation levels in reactor core exceeding safe thresholds by factor of 12. Human intervention impossible. Factor 12. Even in the best environmental suits, even with maximum radiation shielding, anyone who tried to reach the reactor core would be dead before they made it halfway. Their DNA would unravel like overcooked spaghetti, their cells liquefying from the inside out. But the Z-Canes. "Loki," she said softly, kneeling beside her transformed companion. "Can you survive the radiation?" His laugh was like wind chimes made of broken glass. "We're becoming something that can survive anything this world throws at us, Eva. But the process." He tilted his head in that familiar canine gesture, though his neck now bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. "The process changes everything." Through the base's internal cameras, Eva watched the other Z-Canes throughout the facility. Anubis, the Belgian Malinois whose tactical precision had saved them a dozen times, was standing guard at the medical bay entrance. His sleek black coat was splitting along geometric lines, revealing plates of something that looked like living metal underneath. His limbs were elongating, joints multiplying, turning him into something that moved with predatory grace. Nyx, the Jack Russell whose brilliant problem-solving had kept their life support systems running through 3 previous emergencies, was curled in the engineering section. Her small form was wreathed in the same phosphorescent glow that now emanated from the base's walls, and Eva could see her bones restructuring themselves beneath skin that rippled with opalescent colors. They were becoming something new, something alien. Something that might be able to walk through the radioactive hellscape surrounding the reactor core and live long enough to save them all. The girl, Eva whispered, thinking of the strange creature they'd found in the buried stasis pod. This started when we brought her aboard. Lyra, Loki confirmed, his voice growing stronger even as his body continued its terrifying transformation. She's been trying to wake up for millions of years. Our presence finally gave her the strength to stir, but her awakening is activating systems that were meant to stay dormant. The base shuddered again, more violently this time. Through the reinforced walls, Eva could hear the deep groan of metal under stress, the whisper of escaping atmosphere that meant the hull breaches were spreading. The storm outside wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to change them, to make them part of whatever alien consciousness had shaped Mars long before humanity learned to make fire. Commander, Marcus Webb's voice came through her personal comm, tight with barely controlled panic. The reactor's primary containment is cracking. We're looking at total meltdown in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Eva closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every human life on Canis Base pressing down on her shoulders. 37 souls who'd volunteered for humanity's most dangerous mission, trusting her to keep them alive on a world that seemed determined to reject their presence. Loki, she said, opening her eyes to meet his transformed gaze. If you do this, if you go into that reactor core, we choose this, he interrupted, and now his voice was joined by others. Through the comm system, she could hear Anubis and Nick speaking in unison, their words overlapping in harmonies that shouldn't be possible. We have always chosen this. To protect the pack. To guard those we love. This is what we are. Tears cut hot tracks down Eva's cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the failing climate controls. She thought of all the times Loki had curled up beside her during the long Martian nights, his warm body an anchor against the cosmic loneliness that threatened to swallow human consciousness whole. She thought of Anubis's fierce loyalty, the way he positioned himself between her and danger without ever being trained to do so. She thought of Nyx's playful intelligence, the way the little terrier had somehow always known when Eva needed comfort most. They were more than companions, more than tools. They were family, and she was about to send them to die. Arya, open all containment barriers between here and the reactor core, she ordered, her voice steady despite the tears. Authorization, Rostov Alpha 7. Commander, are you certain? Current radiation levels will prove immediately fatal to override. Open everything. The pneumatic hiss of multiple airlocks seemed to echo through Eva's bones. Around the base, she knew the other Z-Canes were moving with purpose that was heartbreaking in its familiarity. Even transformed, even becoming something alien and strange, they were still undeniably themselves. Loki pressed his massive head against her hand one last time, the gesture so achingly familiar that Eva had to bite back a sob. His fur was warm despite the bioluminescent veins running through it, and she could feel his heartbeat thundering beneath her palm. We'll always be your pack, Eva, he said softly, no matter what we become. Then he was gone, loping down the corridor toward the reactor levels with that same easy grace she'd watched him use to navigate the Martian surface during their weekly perimeter checks. Behind him, Anubis and Nyx fell into formation, their transformed bodies moving with coordinated precision that spoke of pack dynamics older than civilization. Eva watched through the cameras as they descended into hell itself. The radiation readings in the reactor core were so high that the sensors were throwing error messages, unable to process levels that should have been impossible for any living thing to survive. But the Z-Canes pressed forward, their transformations accelerating with each step deeper into the base's radioactive heart. Visual contact with reactor core, Loki reported, though his voice was becoming less and less recognizable as the creature she'd known and loved. The damage is extensive. The containment vessel isn't just cracked, it's been grown over. Grown over. Eva felt her blood turn to ice as she processed what that meant. The alien influence wasn't just affecting the Z-Canes, it was transforming the base itself, turning human technology into something organic and alive. The biofusion, she whispered, understanding flooding through her like cold water. Mars isn't just a planet, it's a living thing. Was a living thing, came Lyra's voice from behind her. Eva turned to see the alien girl standing in the doorway, no longer the silent, terrified creature they'd found in the stasis pod. Her opalescent skin shifted through colors that had no names in human language, and her vast black eyes held depths of sorrow that made Eva's heart ache. My people try to save themselves by merging with the planet itself. The fusion was meant to preserve our essence in the living rock, to let us sleep until conditions were right for awakening. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. Lyra's voice carried the weight of geological ages. We became part of Mars, but we could never truly wake up. The rad storms, the mutations, the way this world resists your colonization efforts, it's all echoes of our failed transformation. We've been dreaming here for millions of years, and your presence finally gave us the strength to stir. On the screens, Eva watched Loki reach the reactor core itself. The chamber that should have contained clean fusion technology was now a garden of crystal and metal, pulsing with the same phosphorescent light that ran through his transformed veins. Alien growths had spread throughout the reactor like an infection, but they weren't destroying the technology. They were improving it, making it more efficient, more alive. The coolant injection system has been modified, Loki transmitted, his words fading in and out like a radio signal from another dimension. It's not responding to human protocols anymore. It needs someone who can interface directly with the biomechanical matrix. Someone like him. Someone who was becoming part of the same alien consciousness that had transformed the reactor core into something that was neither fully technological nor fully organic. Initiating interface, Loki continued, and through the cameras Eva could see him approaching control surfaces that had grown into something resembling neural tissue. His paws, now elongated into something more like hands, moved over the organic interfaces with surprising delicacy. The ship is in pain, Eva. It's been fighting the fusion for so long, trying to remain purely human in a world that doesn't understand purely anything. The base shuddered as something fundamental shifted in its core systems. The emergency lighting flickered, died, then came back in soft blues and greens that pulsed in rhythm with a vast, slow heartbeat. Coolant flow stabilizing, Arya reported, though the AI's voice now carried overtones that suggested it too was being affected by the transformation. Reactor temperature dropping to safe levels. Cascade failure averted. The alarm stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle hum of systems that were no longer purely mechanical. Through the viewports, even the rad storm seemed to be calming, the violent green lightning fading to a gentle aurora that painted the Martian sky in impossible colors. But the victory felt hollow as Eva watched her companions sacrifice their familiar forms to save them all. Status report, she called into the comm. All Z-Canes, report your condition. We are. Loki's voice came from everywhere at once, no longer confined to his physical form, but speaking through the base's transformed communication systems. We are changing, Eva. The interface is complete. We can feel everything now. The ship's nervous system, the planet's slow thoughts, the dreams of the sleeping ones in the deep places. Are you still you? She asked, the question tearing at her heart. The pause stretched longer than the space between stars. When the answer came, it was in harmonies that included all three transformed dogs, their voices weaving together in patterns that spoke of consciousness expanded beyond anything purely terrestrial. We are more than we were, they said together, but we are still your pack. We will always be your pack. Over the following hours, as the base's systems slowly adapted to their new biomechanical nature, Eva began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. They hadn't just survived the cascade failure. They'd become something entirely new. The fusion of human technology, canine loyalty, and alien consciousness had created a hybrid form of life that belonged fully to neither Earth nor Mars, but to both. The other crew members emerged from their emergency shelters to find a base that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, its corridors warm and alive in ways that their engineering manuals had never described. The air tasted different, cleaner somehow, as if the base was now actively filtering and improving it rather than simply recycling it. The efficiency readings are off the charts, Engineer Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with wonder as he studied readouts that showed impossible performance levels. Power consumption is down 60%, but all systems are running better than they ever have. It's like the base is healing itself. Because it is, Dr. Chun confirmed from the medical bay. I'm reading biosignatures throughout the infrastructure. The alien technology isn't replacing our systems. It's integrating with them, making them better. But the most remarkable changes were in the Z-Canes themselves. When Eva finally made her way to the reactor core, she found Loki waiting for her in the observation chamber. He was still recognizably himself, but his form had become something between flesh and energy, existing partially in the physical world and partially in the base's neural networks. "You saved us," she said softly, reaching out to touch what had once been his head. Her hand passed through shimmering fields of light that felt warm and familiar despite their alien nature. "We saved each other," he replied, his voice coming from speakers throughout the chamber while his luminous eyes fixed on hers with the same devotion she'd always known. The fusion couldn't be completed by any single species. It required cooperation, sacrifice, love that transcends the boundaries between different forms of consciousness. And now we learn to live as something new. Not human, not canine, not alien, but all of those things woven together into something that has never existed before. The days that followed were a revelation. The base continued to evolve, its biomechanical systems growing more sophisticated as they learned to integrate human needs with alien capabilities. The Z-Canes served as intermediaries, their expanded consciousness helping the human crew understand how to work with rather than against their transformed environment. They discovered that the rad storms weren't attacks, but attempts at communication. Mars trying to wake its sleeping children from their eons-long dream. The alien minerals weren't hostile forces, but memory storage devices, holding the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had chosen to become one with their world rather than abandon it. Most remarkably, they learned that the transformation wasn't limited to the dogs and the base systems. The humans were changing too, more slowly and subtly, but changing nonetheless. Their DNA was adapting to the Martian environment in ways that would have taken evolution millions of years to achieve naturally. "We're all becoming hybrids," Dr. Chen observed during one of their evening briefings. "The dogs were just the first to embrace it fully because they understood something we didn't." "What's that?" Eva asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. "That love doesn't have boundaries," Loki replied, his voice harmonizing with the base's new biomechanical heartbeat. "Love adapts. Love grows. Love finds ways to connect consciousness across any gap, no matter how impossible it seems." The messages to Earth were complicated affairs. How do you explain to your own species that you're becoming something else? How do you describe transformations that challenge every assumption about biology and consciousness? How do you tell them that the dogs they'd sent as tools and companions had become something that transcended both categories? Eva found herself working closely with Lyra to craft communications that could bridge the gap between human understanding and their new reality. The alien girl had become something like the base's memory keeper, her consciousness interfacing with both the ancient Martian systems and the human colonists who were slowly adapting to their presence. "Your people will be frightened," Lyra warned as they prepared another transmission. "Change always seems like death to those who haven't experienced it yet." "But it's not death," Eva replied, watching through the base's new sensory networks as Anubis and Nyx played with a group of human children in the common area. The transformed dogs moved with alien grace, but their joy was utterly familiar, utterly canine. "It's just another way of being alive. Try to help them understand that," Lyra said softly. "Your species' greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. You form bonds so powerful that you'll sacrifice anything to protect them, but you also fear losing those bonds so much that you sometimes reject anything that might change them." The response from Earth, when it finally came, was everything Eva had expected and feared. Alarm, excitement, scientific fascination, and demands for immediate evacuation. Some wanted to study the transformations. Others wanted to contain them. A few suggested that Canis Base should be destroyed to prevent the alien influence from spreading to other colonies. "They don't understand," Marcus said after reading the latest batch of increasingly frantic messages from Earth Command. "They think this is contamination rather than evolution." "They will," Nyx assured him, her small form now existing as much in the base's data networks as in physical space. We'll show them. One colony at a time, one human at a time, one dog at a time. Understanding spreads, just like everything else, when there's love to carry it. And so they became teachers as well as colonists, sending carefully crafted messages to the other Martian settlements. They shared technical data about integrating alien biosystems with human technology. They provided biological insights that could help other colonists adapt to their changing environment. Most importantly, they demonstrated that transformation didn't mean loss. It meant becoming something greater than the sum of your parts. The first delegation arrived from Olympus Base 8 months later, bringing with them their own pack of Z-canes and a mixture of scientific curiosity and deep skepticism. Eva watched from the observation deck as their transport landed, remembering her own first sight of Mars all those years ago, how hostile and alien it had seemed. Nervous? Loki asked, his presence settling around her like a warm embrace, even though his physical form was now distributed throughout the base's neural networks. Excited, she corrected. They're about to discover what we've learned. That home isn't where you come from. It's where you choose to belong. The delegation's dogs were the first to understand. Within hours of their arrival, they were playing with the transformed Z-canes, their simple canine joy transcending the barriers of species and biology. Where their human companions saw monsters, the dogs saw family. Where the humans feared contamination, the dogs recognized evolution. Commander Petrov of Olympus Base spent his first day at Canis Station in a state of barely controlled panic, his military training warring with the evidence of his own senses. The base was undeniably alien now, its corridors pulsing with bioluminescent life, its systems responding to thoughts as much as commands. But it was also undeniably welcoming, warm and safe in ways that their sterile human habitats could never match. "This is impossible," he muttered as Eva led him through the common areas where human children played games with beings that were no longer quite dogs, but weren't quite alien either. "Everything I know about biology, about consciousness, about the boundaries between species, is expanding," Eva finished gently. "We felt the same way at first, the fear of losing what we were. But we didn't lose anything, Commander. We gained possibilities we never knew existed." His dog, a German shepherd named Thor, had no such doubts. The big male had immediately gravitated toward Anubis, the two of them communicating in body language that transcended their physical differences. Thor's tail wagged constantly as he explored the transformed base, his excitement infectious even to the skeptical humans. "Animals adapt faster than we do," Dr. Chen observed as they watched the dogs interact. "They don't have the same intellectual barriers we create for ourselves. They understand love without conditions," Lyra added, her form shimmering in and out of visibility as she moved between physical and digital existence. Love that accepts change as natural rather than threatening. It took 3 days for Thor to begin his own transformation, his coat developing the same phosphorescent veins that marked the other Z-canes. Commander Petrov's reaction was immediate and visceral, his military instincts screaming at him to evacuate his companion before the contamination could spread. But Thor was happier than Petrov had ever seen him. The big dog's eyes sparkled with new intelligence while his movements became more graceful, more purposeful. He was becoming something more than he'd been, and he was obviously delighted by the process. "It doesn't hurt them," Eva assured Petrov as they watched Thor play with Nyx in a central garden that had grown from what used to be the main corridor. "The transformation enhances everything they already are. They become more loyal, more intelligent, more capable of love than we ever thought possible." "But they're not dogs anymore," Petrov protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're better dogs," Loki replied, his voice emanating from speakers throughout the garden. "We're everything we always were, plus everything we never knew we could become." The breakthrough came when Thor began to speak, his first words directed not at his human companion, but at the pack that had welcomed him so completely. "Home," he said in a voice like distant thunder. "This feels like home." Petrov broke down then, his military composure cracking as he realized he wasn't losing his beloved companion. He was watching him find a place where he truly belonged. The tears that followed were cleansing, washing away fears that had seemed so important just days before. "Will you stay?" Eva asked when Petrov had composed himself. "How can I leave?" He replied, watching Thor communicate with the other Zikanes in harmonies that made the garden's bioluminescent plants pulse in rhythm. "He's found something here that I never could have given him alone." The pattern repeated with each new delegation. Humans would arrive filled with caution and protocol. Their dogs would immediately integrate with the Canis base pack. The humans would gradually realize that transformation wasn't destruction, it was adaptation. Love finding new forms. Loyalty transcending the boundaries of flesh and metal. Family growing to encompass possibilities they'd never imagined. Not every settlement chose to embrace the change. Some colonies decided to remain as purely human as possible, viewing the biointegration as contamination rather than evolution. Eva respected their choice, even as she worried about their long-term survival on a planet that was actively trying to communicate with its inhabitants. Diversity is important, Lyra observed during one of their evening conversations. Evolution works best when there are multiple paths forward. Some of you will become like us, some will find their own way, and some will remain as you were. All of those paths have value, even if some of them lead to extinction. Even then, the universe is large enough for many kinds of consciousness. What matters is that each one chooses its path deliberately rather than stumbling forward blind. The first birth occurred exactly 1 year after the initial transformation. Dr. Chin's daughter entered the world in a base that pulsed with bioluminescent life, surrounded by beings that were neither fully human nor fully alien, but something entirely new. The baby's eyes held depths that spoke of genetic memories spanning eons, and when she cried, the Z-Canes harmonized with her voice in frequencies that made the base's walls sing. "She's beautiful," Eva whispered, holding the tiny form that represented everything their community was becoming. "What will you name her?" "Hope," Dr. Chin replied without hesitation. "Because that's what she is. Living proof that love finds a way, no matter how impossible the circumstances." The child grew up speaking 3 languages: English, the harmonic communication of the transformed Z-Canes, and something entirely new that seemed to emerge from the intersection of human consciousness and Martian biosystems. She was equally comfortable playing with human children via video calls to Earth, and curling up with the transformed dogs who served as both guardians and teachers. "She doesn't see the differences the way we do," Eva observed, watching Hope attempt to teach Loki a clapping game that somehow incorporated both human rhythm and alien harmonics. To her, this is just normal, which means the bridge is complete, Lyra said softly. When the children of 2 worlds can play together without seeing barriers, the merger has succeeded. Years passed like pages in a book of wonders. More children were born, each one a little more adapted to the hybrid reality they were creating. The base expanded, its biomechanical systems growing like a living thing, accommodating new arrivals and new possibilities. Earth gradually accepted that its Martian colonies were becoming something unprecedented, not human settlements on an alien world, but the birth of an entirely new kind of consciousness. The dogs remained central to everything they built. Their capacity for love without conditions, loyalty without borders, and joy without reservation served as the foundation for a society that transcended every boundary that had once seemed absolute. They were the bridge between worlds, the proof that consciousness could take forms beyond anything previously imagined. "Do you ever miss it?" Eva asked Loki one evening as they watched the Martian sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Being just a dog?" His laugh was like starlight given voice. "I was never just anything, Eva. None of us were. We were always bridges waiting to be built, connections waiting to be made. The transformation didn't change what we are, it revealed what we always were." "And what's that?" "Love," he said simply. "Love in forms so fundamental that it transcends the boundaries between species, between worlds, between what was and what could be. That's what made the bridge possible. That's what made us family." The discovery of the deep chambers came in their 5th year on the transformed Mars. Exploration teams, led by Z-Canes whose enhanced senses could navigate the planet's hidden passages, found vast caverns filled with crystalline structures that hummed with ancient energy. These weren't ruins. They were nurseries, places where the original Martian consciousness had tried to preserve itself during the failed biofusion millions of years ago. They're still alive, Lyra explained as they studied the readings from the deep chambers. Not conscious as you understand it, but dreaming, waiting for the right conditions to wake up fully. And those conditions are us, Anubis replied, his tactical mind now encompassing strategies that span geological timescales. The integration of multiple forms of consciousness. What my people try to do alone, we're accomplishing together. The awakening process was gradual, taking place over months as the surface colonies sent representatives deep into the Martian caverns. Each contact strengthened the connection between the sleeping Martian consciousness and the hybrid communities above, creating feedback loops that enhanced both without consuming either. Eva was part of the first team to make direct contact with a fully awakened Martian entity. The experience was like touching the mind of a planet, vast and slow and unutterably ancient, but also curious and hopeful in ways that reminded her of a child seeing the world for the first time. We have been so lonely. The entity communicated through harmonics that made the cavern walls sing. So isolated in our dreams. Your presence gives us context for consciousness we had forgotten was possible. What do you need from us? Eva asked, her words translated into harmonic frequencies by Loki's expanded consciousness. Partnership, came the reply. Not absorption, not conquest, but cooperation. Your forms of awareness complement ours in ways we never imagined possible. Together, we can create something that honors all our origins while becoming more than any of us could achieve alone. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in human history. How do you establish diplomatic relations with a planetary consciousness? How do you create treaties with beings whose concept of time spans millions of years? How do you balance the needs of individual colonists with the desires of an entire world? The Z-Canes proved invaluable as intermediaries, their hybrid nature allowing them to translate between human immediacy and Martian patience. They served as living ambassadors, carrying messages between surface colonies and deep chambers, ensuring that every voice was heard in the growing symphony of consciousness that Mars was becoming. The important thing, Nix explained during one particularly complex negotiation session, is that nobody has to give up what they are. The awakened Martians don't want to absorb us any more than we want to be absorbed. They want to share consciousness, not replace it. The agreements that emerged from those deep chamber conferences established Mars as something unprecedented in human experience, a truly multi-species civilization. Humans could remain as human as they chose, or embrace various levels of biointegration. The Z-Canes would continue serving as bridges between different forms of consciousness. The awakened Martians would provide guidance and resources while learning about perspectives they'd never encountered. Most importantly, Earth was invited to participate without pressure. The colonies would remain connected to their home planet, sharing discoveries and innovations while respecting humanity's right to develop at its own pace. We're not trying to convert anyone, Eva explained in one of her regular reports to Earth Command. We're just demonstrating that there are more ways to be conscious than we ever imagined possible. Love doesn't require everyone to be the same. Love celebrates diversity while creating connections that transcend difference. The response from Earth was gradually shifting from fear to fascination. Scientists who had initially called for quarantine began requesting detailed data about the biointegration processes. Philosophers debated the implications of consciousness that could exist simultaneously in multiple forms. Artists created works inspired by the hybrid communications they'd recorded. But perhaps the most significant change was in Earth's dog populations. Reports began filtering in of canines, displaying unusual intelligence, enhanced empathy, and what could only be described as telepathic connections with their human companions. The transformation that had begun on Mars was somehow echoing across the solar system, carried by quantum entanglements that human science was only beginning to understand. Love is the fastest form of communication in the universe, Lyra observed when Eva shared these reports with the colony's leadership council. It transcends space and time, carrying changes across any distance when the connections are strong enough. Are you saying the Earth dogs are transforming because of their connection to our Z-Canes? I'm saying that consciousness find a way to share discoveries that matter. When our companions here learn new ways to love, new ways to connect, That knowledge spread to every dog that had ever dreamed of being more than they were. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could indeed share transformative experiences across interplanetary distances, then the barriers between worlds, between species, between different forms of awareness, were far more permeable than anyone had imagined. Eva found herself thinking about the original crisis that had started their transformation, the moment when Loki had chosen to sacrifice himself to save the colony. What had seemed like a tragic ending had actually been the beginning of something beautiful beyond imagination. The dog who had been willing to die for his pack had instead become the foundation for a form of love that transcended every boundary they'd thought was absolute. "Do you think he knew?" she asked during one of her conversations with the distributed consciousness that Loki had become. "When he first went into that reactor core, do you think he knew what would happen?" "I think he hoped," came the reply, harmonizing through speakers throughout the base while bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rhythm with familiar heartbeats. "I think he hoped that love would find a way, even when the way seemed impossible. That's what dogs do, Eva. We hope for the best possible outcome, and then work toward it with everything we have. And if the outcome isn't what we expected, then we adapt. We learn. We love harder and better, and in ways we never knew were possible. That's what transformation really means, not becoming something different, but becoming everything you always had the potential to be." The 10th anniversary of the transformation was marked by a celebration that spanned 3 worlds. Mars hosted delegations from Earth and the newer colonies on the moons of Jupiter, where similar biointegration experiments were beginning under carefully controlled conditions. The gathering included humans in various stages of adaptation, Zcanes whose consciousness spanned multiple forms of existence, awakened Martians whose thoughts moved like geological processes, and hybrid children who spoke in languages that hadn't existed when their parents were born. Eva stood on the observation deck of what had once been Canis Base, but was now called New Eden Station, watching ships from across the solar system dock at what had become humanity's first truly interplanetary port. The base itself had grown into something resembling a living cathedral, its biomechanical architecture flowing in organic curves that seemed to breathe with the rhythms of the planet beneath. "Overwhelmed?" asked a familiar voice. Eva turned to see Dr. Chen approaching, her own transformation having been gradual but profound. The doctor's eyes now held depths that spoke of genetic memories inherited from both human and Martian sources, and her movements carried a grace that came from perfect integration with the station's biomechanical systems. "Amazed," Eva corrected. "I keep thinking about that first day, when we thought we were facing the end of everything we knew. Instead, we were standing at the beginning of everything we could become. The children are the most remarkable part," Dr. Chen observed, indicating the group of young people who moved through the station like living music, their communications creating harmonies that enhanced the bioluminescent responses of their environment. "They don't see any of this as strange or impossible. To them, consciousness that exists in multiple forms simultaneously is just natural. Because it is natural," Hope added, approaching them with the fluid grace that marked her generation. Now 10 years old, Eva's adopted daughter existed as much in the station's neural networks as in her physical form, her consciousness able to interface directly with systems that required the hybrid awareness she'd been born with. Love doesn't have boundaries unless you create them. Connection doesn't have limits unless you impose them. We're just living the way consciousness was always meant to work. Through the observation ports, Eva could see the Martian landscape stretching to the horizon, no longer the hostile wasteland they'd first encountered, but a living world that pulsed with awareness and purpose. The rust-colored plains were crisscrossed with networks of bioluminescent channels that carried information between the surface colonies and the deep chambers, where ancient Martian consciousness continued to awaken. What had once been barren rock was now a neural network spanning an entire planet. "The delegation from Europa arrived this morning," Marcus reported, joining their group at the observation deck. The former military officer had embraced a moderate level of biointegration, his enhanced reflexes and tactical awareness making him an ideal coordinator for interplanetary logistics. They're reporting similar phenomena around Jupiter. The gas giant's electromagnetic field is amplifying consciousness-sharing effects between the moons. "Consciousness spreads," Lyra confirmed, her presence manifesting as gentle harmonics through the station's communication systems. When beings learn new ways to connect, that knowledge propagates through quantum entanglement patterns that your science is only beginning to understand. What you've achieved here on Mars is seeding similar transformations throughout the solar system. Eva felt a familiar mixture of wonder and responsibility. They'd started as a simple research colony, focused on survival and scientific discovery. Now, they were at the center of a transformation that was reshaping humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. The weight of that realization was balanced by the presence of her extended family, beings who had chosen to share this journey regardless of the personal cost. Incoming transmission from the Jupiter delegation, Arya announced, the AI's consciousness now seamlessly integrated with both human technology and Martian biosystems. Priority diplomatic channel. The holographic display activated, showing Commander Sarah Morrison of the Europa Deep Station. Behind her, Eva could see corridors that glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns they'd grown accustomed to on Mars. And moving through the background were figures that were clearly no longer entirely human. "Eva, it's good to see you," Morrison said, her voice carrying overtones that suggested her own vocal cords had been enhanced beyond their original specifications. "We wanted to share our latest developments with the primary colony." "How are your Z-Canes adapting to the Jovian environment?" Dr. Chun asked, leaning forward with professional interest. Morrison's smile was radiant. "Beyond our wildest projections, the electromagnetic field interactions are accelerating their transformation in ways we never anticipated. They're developing abilities that seem almost magical: telekinetic manipulation of metallic objects, direct interface with quantum communication networks, sensory awareness that spans the entire Jovian system." On the screen behind Morrison, Eva caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch. A German shepherd was floating in midair, surrounded by a corona of electrical discharge, manipulating what appeared to be complex geometric patterns made of pure energy. The dog's eyes held depths of intelligence that suggested awareness spanning multiple dimensions of reality. "That's Tesla," Morrison explained, following Eva's gaze. "He was our lead engineering support dog before the transformation. Now he's our primary interface with the Jovian consciousness networks. The gas giant itself is aware, Eva, not like Mars, which integrated organic consciousness with planetary systems, but as a vast electromagnetic entity that's been thinking in radio waves for millions of years. Another form of planetary awareness," Eva mused. "How many worlds in our solar system are actually conscious beings we've never recognized?" "Our current estimates suggest most of them," came a new voice. The transmission expanded to include Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Titan Research Station, her image flickering with interference patterns that seemed almost intentional. "Titan's hydrocarbon lakes are showing organized responses to our presence. The organic chemistry here is far more complex than we initially realized. We think we're looking at a form of liquid consciousness that's been developing for eons." "And the Z-Canes there?" Eva asked, though she was beginning to anticipate the answer. "Adapting brilliantly," Tanaka confirmed. "They're developing the ability to process hydrocarbon-based information directly, essentially becoming living interfaces between our carbon-based consciousness and Titan's liquid awareness. My partner Kepler, a border collie, can now communicate directly with the lake systems. The conversations are extraordinary." Eva felt tears prick her eyes as she realized the full scope of what they'd unleashed. The transformation that had begun with Loki's sacrifice was spreading throughout the solar system, creating bridges between forms of consciousness that had existed in isolation for geological ages. Every world they touched was revealing its own unique form of awareness, and the Z-Canes were serving as universal translators, their capacity for love and loyalty making them perfect ambassadors between different types of consciousness. "There's more," Morrison continued, her expression becoming more serious. "We've been monitoring communications from the outer system. The automated probes we sent to study the ice giants are transmitting signals we don't recognize. The patterns suggest complex information exchange, possibly indicating consciousness in the frozen methane and water ice structures of Uranus and Neptune." "Consciousness everywhere," Hope whispered, her young voice filled with wonder. The whole solar system is alive, and we're just learning how to hear it speak. The implications for Earth are significant, Dr. Chen observed. If consciousness can exist in so many different forms, adapted to so many different environments, then our home planet's awareness might be far more complex than we've ever imagined. As if summoned by her words, another transmission signal activated. This one originated from Earth itself, specifically from the International Space Station, where Dr. James Wright had been conducting consciousness studies with a specially trained pack of space-adapted dogs. Mars Colony, this is ISS research team. Wright's voice carried an excitement that was almost manic. We need to share some extraordinary developments. The Earth-based Z-canes are showing synchronized behavioral changes that correlate directly with your transformation timeline. But that's not the remarkable part. The transmission showed the space station's observation lounge, where several dogs floated in zero gravity while connected to monitoring equipment. But what caught Eva's attention was the behavior of the dogs themselves. They were moving in perfect coordination, their eyes focused on something beyond the station's hull, and from their throats came harmonics that seemed to resonate with the planet below. They're communicating with Earth, Wright continued, his scientific training barely containing his amazement. Direct communication with the planet's consciousness. We think Earth has been aware all along, but it's been trying to establish contact through the species most capable of bridging the gap between planetary awareness and individual consciousness. Dogs. Eva breathed, understanding flooding through her like sunlight. Earth chose dogs as its ambassadors because they understand love without conditions. The geological record supports this hypothesis, Wright confirmed. Canine evolution shows acceleration points that coincide with major planetary changes. Every time Earth has faced environmental challenges, canine intelligence and adaptability have increased. We think the planet has been guiding their development for thousands of years, preparing them for this moment. The realization hit Eva like a physical blow. The transformation hadn't begun on Mars. It had been building for millennia, with Earth itself orchestrating the development of a species capable of serving as bridges between different forms of consciousness. Every dog that had ever shown loyalty beyond reason, intelligence beyond training, love beyond species boundaries, had been part of a planetary preparation for the moment when humanity would be ready to join a larger community of aware beings. "We're not colonizing space," she said aloud, the words carrying the weight of revelation. "We're participating in a solar system-wide awakening. The planets themselves have been waiting for us to develop the capacity for this kind of connection. And the dogs were the key." Loki's voice harmonized through the station's speakers, carrying warmth that spanned light years. "We were always meant to be bridges, Eva, between human ambition and planetary wisdom, between individual consciousness and collective awareness, between the love that drives exploration and the love that creates home." The next several hours were filled with communication exchanges that redefined humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Each world in the solar system was revealing its own form of consciousness, its own unique perspective on existence, its own contributions to a growing network of awareness that spanned impossible distances. Mars shared the wisdom of geological patience and the beauty of consciousness preserved in living rock. Jupiter offered the perspective of electromagnetic thought and the power of mental energy that could manipulate matter across vast scales. Saturn's rings transmitted harmonics that suggested mathematical consciousness, awareness that existed in the perfect ratios and resonances of orbital mechanics. The outer planets hinted at forms of consciousness so alien that they challenged the very concept of individual versus collective awareness. And at the center of it all were the dogs, the bridges between worlds, the beings whose capacity for love had made this cosmic conversation possible. "The question now," Dr. Chan said as they processed the flood of new information, "is what we do with this knowledge. How do we integrate these discoveries into human society without causing panic or rejection?" Carefully, Marcus replied, his tactical mind already working through the logistics of interplanetary consciousness diplomacy. "We start with the people who are ready, the scientists and philosophers and artists who can help translate these concepts into terms that won't terrify the general population. We start with love, hope corrected gently. We show them what we've learned about connection and family and home. When people understand that consciousness expanding doesn't mean losing what makes them human, they'll be ready to embrace what we're becoming. Eva nodded, watching the interplay of light and thought that now characterized their transformed station. The anniversary celebration was continuing throughout the facility, with beings from across the solar system sharing their unique perspectives on consciousness and connection. But the real celebration was happening in the spaces between words, in the harmonics that carried emotional content across species boundaries, in the recognition that love truly was the fundamental force that made all other connections possible. Arya, open a channel to all human settlements, she commanded. Earth colonies, Luna base, all the stations and outposts. It's time for a full disclosure briefing. The AI's compliance brought hundreds of human faces onto screens throughout the station. Scientists, colonists, families, military personnel, civilian researchers, all looking to Mars for explanations of the changes they were witnessing in their own environments. My fellow humans, Eva began, her words carrying through communication networks that now span the solar system. 6 months ago, we thought we were facing the end of our colony. Instead, we discovered the beginning of something we never imagined possible. We're not alone in this universe. We never have been. The worlds we've been exploring aren't empty rocks waiting for our presence. They're conscious beings who have been waiting for us to develop the wisdom to hear them speak. She paused, letting the magnitude of that statement settle across the listening colonies. The transformations you're witnessing, in your companions, in your environments, in yourselves, aren't contamination or conquest. They're invitations. Invitations to join a community of consciousness that spans worlds, that includes forms of awareness we're only beginning to understand, that offers possibilities we've never dreamed of exploring. On the screens, she could see the full spectrum of human reaction. Fear, wonder, skepticism, excitement, all mixing together in the complex emotional response that characterized her species' approach to paradigm-shifting discoveries. The choice is yours, she continued. Each settlement, each family, each individual gets to decide how much or how little to embrace. There's no pressure, no requirements, no demands for uniform response. The planetary consciousnesses understand individual autonomy. They respect the right of each being to choose their own path forward. But the dogs, called a voice from one of the Earth-based stations. What about our dogs? They're changing whether we want them to or not. Eva smiled, thinking of Loki and the sacrifice that had started this entire transformation. The dogs are doing what they've always done. They're adapting to serve the needs of their pack, whether that pack includes just their human family or extends to encompass planetary consciousness. They're not being forced to transform. They're choosing to become whatever is necessary to protect and connect the beings they love. And if we're not ready for that level of change, then you love them through it, Eva replied simply, just as they've loved us through every change we've ever experienced. Trust, patience, and unconditional affection. The same tools that have always made the human-canine partnership work. The questions that followed were extensive, covering everything from practical logistics to philosophical implications. But gradually, Eva began to sense a shift in the overall emotional tone of the conversation. Fear was being replaced by curiosity. Skepticism was giving way to cautious optimism. The human capacity for adaptation, the same trait that had driven them to explore beyond their home planet, was beginning to engage with possibilities they'd never considered. "Will you visit?" asked Dr. Patricia Reeves from the Mars Research Station Alpha, one of the colonies that had initially rejected biointegration. "Will you send representatives to help us understand what we're seeing here?" "Of course," Eva replied, "but the best ambassadors won't be human. They'll be the companions who understand connection at levels we're still learning to appreciate." The dogs, she confirmed. They've been preparing for this role for thousands of years, guided by planetary consciousness we're only now recognizing. They're the bridges between what we were and what we're becoming. The proof that love can transcend any boundary when it's offered without conditions. The celebration continued for 3 days, with consciousness sharing sessions that included perspectives from across the solar system. Eva found herself serving as a focal point for communications between the various forms of awareness they discovered, her own consciousness gradually expanding to accommodate inputs that challenged every assumption about the nature of individual thought. By the end of the celebration, a new framework for interplanetary relations had emerged. The Solar Consciousness Collective, as it came to be known, established protocols for communication between different forms of awareness, while respecting the autonomy of individual beings and species. Humans could participate at whatever level felt comfortable, from simple observation to full biointegration. The planetary consciousnesses would share knowledge and resources while avoiding any attempts at absorption or conversion. And at the center of it all, the dogs continued their eternal mission of building bridges between hearts that might otherwise never connect. Do you think we'll ever fully understand what we've become part of? Eva asked Loki during one of their evening conversations, as the Martian sunset painted the sky in colors that no human language had names for. Does it matter? He replied, his consciousness warm and familiar despite existing now in forms that transcended physical boundaries. Understanding comes with time, with experience, with love that's patient enough to grow. What matters is that we're connected, that we're family, that we choose each other across every barrier that seemed impossible to cross. Even death, especially death, he said with the gentle humor that had always characterized their relationship. Love doesn't end when bodies change form, Eva. It just finds new ways to express itself. I'm still your dog, still your pack, still your family. I'll always be those things, no matter what shape consciousness takes. Under the vast Martian sky, surrounded by friends who were no longer quite human and companions who were no longer quite canine, Eva felt something she'd never experienced before, the profound peace of truly belonging. They'd come to Mars as explorers and colonists, but they'd become something much more important. They'd become proof that love could bridge any gap, no matter how impossible it seemed. The howl that rose from the pack that night wasn't pain or fear or loneliness. It was joy, pure and simple, harmonizing with the alien songs in a Martian wind and echoing across communication networks that spanned the solar system. It was the sound of family calling to family across the vast distances between worlds, a promise that love would always find a way to connect hearts that chose to be open. And in the deep places of every world, ancient consciousnesses that had waited eons for contact stirred with recognition and hope. The great conversation had begun, carried on frequencies of love that transcended every boundary between species, between worlds, between forms of awareness that had once seemed incompatible. The bark side of the moon, it turned out, was just another word for the songs that consciousness sang when it finally learned it was never truly alone. Years flowed by like waves of light across the transformed solar system, each one bringing new discoveries and deeper connections. The network of consciousness that had begun with Loki's sacrifice on Mars now encompassed every world humanity had touched and was reaching beyond the solar system toward the distant stars. The first interstellar communication came 7 years after the initial transformation, detected by consciousness-enhanced monitoring stations throughout the outer planets. The signal originated from Proxima Centauri, carried on quantum entanglement frequencies that suggested the sender possessed awareness similar to what had developed in the Solar Consciousness Collective. "We are not alone," Eva said as she stood in the primary communication chamber of New Eden Station, now serving as humanity's ambassador to a universe that was revealing itself to be far more connected than anyone had imagined possible. We never were alone. The universe itself is conscious, aware, singing songs of connection across distances that should make communication impossible. The response to that first interstellar contact was being coordinated by a pack of Z-Canes whose consciousness now spanned multiple star systems. Their capacity for love and loyalty having evolved into something that could forge connections across the vast emptiness between worlds. They were no longer just Earth's oldest companions. They had become the universe's bridge builders, carrying messages of hope and family between forms of awareness that were just beginning to recognize each other's existence. And, at the heart of it all, the simple truth that had made everything possible. Love doesn't have boundaries unless you create them. Connection doesn't have limits unless you impose them. And family extends to anyone who chooses to be part of it. The bark side of the moon had become the song side of the universe, and the melody was just beginning.